So my theory is that we all have a bucket, and all of the exposures that we have to toxins get added to that bucket. Think about it like a little marble being added, drop of water, whatever that vision is for you. And at some point, if we have too many toxin exposures, it runs over. Figure out where we can reduce those exposures. Let's look at everything else that you're doing in your life and figure out where we can reduce those exposures just so that your bucket doesn't run it over. Because once it runs over, you're kind of in trouble, right?
Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics Raw, Real, Relatable Podcast. I'm your host, Susan Robbins, epigenetic human performance coach. This is where we discuss all things lifestyle, environment, food, exercise, work, mind, and social interaction as they pertain to epigenetic expression in a way that's relatable to everyone. So if you're ready to start viewing you as an individual, take control of your life and health, and get results, buckle up, here we go. Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics Raw, Real, Relatable Podcast. I'm your host, Susan Robbins. This is where we talk everything that is lifestyle and how it affects your epigenetic expression or your genetic expression. So today we are going to have a fun one. You are going to feel so empowered by the time you are finished this episode. And we are with Elizabeth Boulos. Elizabeth is the ingredient insider. And this is where you're going to get information on toxins all in one place. This is what she does. I met with her a couple of weeks ago. We had a little chat to see if this was going to be a great fit. And oh my God, we talked for over an hour. And I will tell you that my mouth was like a gape for most of that time, thinking that I knew, a lot. I knew basically not much at all after speaking with Elizabeth. And she is just a wealth of information. And I said, we need to bring this out here to my listeners. We are surrounded with so much crap in everything. And she talks about it with personal care, cosmetics, cleaning products, foods and beverages, water, clothing, kitchenware. And we're going to have another one that we're going to present to you today that will shock you. I was blown away. We're just going to hop into this. Elizabeth is just, again, she's just fascinating. She's the founder of, again, the Ingredient Insider, and she helps clients reduce their toxin exposure to improve their health outcomes. She also works with businesses to ensure that they have low toxin work environments, are sourcing safe and sustainable products for their businesses, developing products with minimal toxin impact to human environmental health. And her background is in marketing, branding, sustainability, product sourcing, product development. She's got a bachelor's in communication and education, a master's in marketing and customer experience, and certificate in public health management, and other numerous courses in toxins education, water testing, and filtration. So another underachiever I see here. But just such a pleasure to have you here. And one of the reasons I wanted her on here, this is such a great fit because you all know that I do DNA testing, and one of my panels is toxicants and inflammation. So we look at how does your body, how are those detox pathways genetically prepared to get rid of all the junk that we surround ourselves with or take in on a daily basis. So we're going to, again, you're going to feel, instead of the fear, people are so afraid of everything. I'm afraid to eat this. I'm afraid to go breathe air. Everyone has just, this has just become such a fear-based society. And what we want to do is bring out that it's empowering. The more you know, the more you can put into a way that will not bring you fear. Because even people say to me, I don't want to know my DNA. I don't want to know, because then, then you're worried, then they're worried about something's going to happen to them. DNA is probability and propensity. So if you, and again, we control 95% of how it expresses. So you have that empowerment of understanding how you're created and how to work with it. And this is where she also comes in, that get the information, stop the fear, bring in your power. So without further ado, Miss Elizabeth Boulos, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's awesome to have you here. So, yeah, like I said, I love to jump in here. The first thing is you started again in marketing. It wasn't like degrees in toxics, toxins, right? Toxic things. So, how did you get into this field? What's your story?
And I can make this so long and so short, but I would say really it started, I've always had a passion for education. I mean, my own education, I love learning, but I also have always loved educating others. I was going to be a teacher, from the second grade, I was like geared up to be a teacher. But somewhere along the way in my undergrad, I decided to move towards communications, marketing. I just loved the creative aspect of that, storytelling and how you connect with consumers and how you connect with others, because I'm also a connector. Like, I love that power and I love sharing my story. I love sharing other people's stories. And so when I graduated, I ended up working in licensing at first for brands like Tootsie Roll and Whammo, and I did that for a bit. And then I moved into working for an international grocery retailer, and I started in a marketing role there. I served in various capacities, but some of those were working with major consumer goods companies and also the little suppliers. And my job was ultimately, when you go into a grocery store, to help you buy more products. like that was like really where I started just learning about consumer behavior and how we shop and the stories we're told. And just it's really fascinating when you learn about consumer psychology that way, and I learned a ton in that role. Eventually, I moved over into product development thing. I worked on major sustainability initiatives, and I loved that work. But my job in many of those roles as a brand manager, designing packaging, and was to determine which claims we were going to put on the packaging and the story that we were going to tell about these products to get the consumer at the shelf to buy those products.
Hmm.
And in that, a lot of the work I did was actually on perishable products in the grocery store. So think deli, dairy, meat, seafood, produce. And that's usually where we're told to go shop, right? As consumers, like that's where you're most.
Stay to the outer aisles.
Yeah, exactly. Stay out of the aisles. And so they're the healthier foods. And I just learned so much in those roles. Like, I have been to every meat slaughterhouse for every protein you can possibly imagine in the US,
Wow.
which most people are like, I don't want to know. uh, you know, don't tell me that. But I loved it. Like, I was often the only female in a world among men. I'm a petite person. I was very young. And most people are like, "Are you sure you're okay to come see it?" I'm like, no, I actually really want to know where my food comes from, how it's made. Like, I
Love it.
want to understand how we market it to consumers. And so that was like a little bit of my taste test. And then I also worked overseas. It was a hybrid sustainability, product development, sourcing type of role. And in that, I also just learned on the global scale, like the differences in regulations in Europe and Asia compared to the US, Canada. And my eyes were just completely opened because I really had always considered myself to be more of like your natural, organic, healthy, sustainable consumer, just in what I know, what I've learned, always being mindful of health, like since an early age. And I loved all of these roles, but ultimately when I left, the industry, I was like, I would love to empower more people to know how to truly read ingredient labels, understand what marketing claims are, because I worked in the industry and even I got fooled along the way, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there is, especially in the US, there's just so much clutter out there, whether it's on packaging, whether it's in stores. And I hated that I got fooled along the way too. I thought I was buying something healthy and sustainable. And then as I would dig, I'd be like, oh, this is greenwashing, or what I call safe washing. It's like safe washing. It's actually not as good as you want it to be. So from there, I just really took off and running, jumped into entrepreneurship, really just kind of blindly, I would say, but just really wanting to make a difference and really wanting to help friends and family. And again, this is sort of my longer version, but I I've loved it, and I've continued to educate myself. I've taken tons of courses. I just got my certificate in public health management, but really that's my long story. Like I love educating others, but ultimately it's really about empowering people to make informed choices that make them feel good and being able to cut through all of that clutter that is out there because there's just so much.
It's so it's so funny because I resonated with that whole part. That whole end part. This is why we're here, to cut through clutter, both of us, right? And make things understandable for people. But what I jotted down at the beginning, it made me laugh. Like, you started out with Tootsie Roll, and you want to talk about like some of the most toxic, right? Is where you began and to where you are now. The difference there, it's crazy. But yeah, congratulations on your newest certification. So good on you. Just to help keep educating, and that's exactly what you're here to do. So let's start. You talk about a toxin bucket.
Mhm.
So if you could fill the listeners in on this toxin bucket, I'd love that.
Absolutely. So my theory is that we all have a bucket. And you can picture a bucket, a jar, but I say a bucket. And all of the exposures that we have to toxins get added to that bucket. Think about it like a little marble being added, drop of water, whatever that vision is for you. And at some point, if we have too many toxin exposures, it runs over. And what happens when it runs over is we get sick
Mhm.
or and these toxins can be chemical toxins, they can be stress toxins, they can be social toxins. My sweet spot really is more on the chemical toxins when we're talking about it. But the best part about this toxin bucket is that just as you keep adding little things to it through your exposures, eliminating exposures also removes things from this bucket. And that
Mhm.
is really where I focus because at the end of the day, we cannot all be perfect. I am not perfect.
None of us.
No, we literally
None of us.
we cannot be there. Anybody who works in the world of health that tells you they are perfect and doing everything just right, I can
Walk
tell you
away.
they're lying to you. Yeah, I mean, they
Well,
are.
they're lying.
Totally. And that is never where I come from. It's not to tell you, don't ever do this, don't ever eat this, don't ever buy this product. It is saying, okay, what are your health goals? What's going on with your body? What is going on with your health? And tell me about your lifestyle. Tell me about your work environment. Are you in a profession where you might have higher toxin exposures? And if you are, let's evaluate them and let's whatever those chemicals are you might be being exposed to during your workday or your lifestyle or your hobbies, let's try to eliminate them in other areas just to try to keep you in balance, keep that bucket from overflowing. And that is really that's where I think the empowerment comes from is okay, this is my job and I love my job, or this is my hobby and I love this hobby, or this is what makes me, especially as women, like this habit or lifestyle choice makes me feel more beautiful or whatever it is. Okay, well, you don't have to give that up, but just let's look at everything else that you're doing in your life and figure out where we can reduce those exposures just so that your bucket doesn't run it over. Because once it runs over, you're kind of in trouble, right? You
So true.
then
Yeah.
you're reactionary, or then you're doing band-aids, or then you're getting on medications. And I don't even discount medications. I firmly believe that, medications have a place, supplements have a place, all of that does. But there's a lot that we can do to minimize the number of medications we might need, or minimize, the number of
Mhm.
supplements we might need, or not have to make as many trade-offs as we do when we get sick. Because once we get sick, you end up having to most people, if they're trying to get well, really have to funnel down those toxin exposures. And if you can keep your bucket really at, halfway or whatever
Mhm.
it is
Mhm.
from overflowing, then, you can still keep your life in balance. You can still eat the quote unquote bad foods or whatever, whatever it is that's like bad or, that marketing or professionals can sometimes make you feel fear based around, oh, I can never have that or I can never do that. And that's not my approach. My approach is let's keep that bucket in check.
Yeah.
Uh, and you can live a life that is fulfilling to you and not fear based and empowering and energetic and informed.
Informed. That's the key thing, right? And I tell clients this all the time. You have choice. Even when we do the DNA or the pH 360 profile, which gives very specific recommendations. And interestingly enough, within the onboarding in the questionnaire, it asks, are you exposed to chemical products or toxins? It takes that into account so that it's telling the app, it's telling the Shea app, this is where this body needs support here when it comes to different foods that are more maybe detoxifying than not, right? It's there, like you said, it's the environment and your lifestyle. Even if you're given a crappy hand with your detox systems, you still have control. There's ways we dial that up so that you still don't want that toxin bucket overflowing. And I personally, I've had issues with mercury and that, I mean, any of these toxins, especially these metals, are pretty nasty. I mean, I don't know if you consider lime a toxin because
Yeah, so I do. So this is my super vulnerable moment because I actually haven't shared this with a lot of people, but I was recently diagnosed with Bartonella, which is a Lyme or
co-infection.
born co-infection.
Yeah.
And I've worked with a lot of Lyme clients over the years. I have a friend who runs Lyme Warrior, which is a Lyme nonprofit.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah. Because as a limey for years. Yeah.
Yeah. And your story is somewhat similar to mine, or at least a couple of points along the way. Like, I think we jumped ourselves into like helper roles early in our profession. And then, we took on stress. I was also diagnosed with celiac early on, which I think sort of covered up my diagnosis because I just only had like small bits of it coming to life, like coming out of dormancy. And my body was strong enough at those times to like keep it, at bay enough. And then high stress in my life is what we believe really brought it out of dormancy. But I absolutely do. I mean, I think I've talked about this before, right? Because I do tend to focus on chemicals, but Lyme co-infections, vector-borne illnesses in and of itself are a totally different type of environmental toxin, right? There's definitely chemicals in the air, our food, our water, our products, but true environmental toxins are those that are often vector-borne. And so I would not say I'm a Lyme expert, but I do know a lot, and I do work with a lot of that population, and most people don't realize how impactful it can be to your life,
Absolutely.
as you well know too.
Yeah. Yeah. It took 11 years to diagnose me. I got it twice. Second time was from a hornet. It's anything with, as you said, vector borne. People think it's only ticks with Lyme, and it's not. It could be mosquitoes, spiders, anything with a vector can transmit Lyme. And it's the number, it's a huge epidemic. From all the research I've read, it's about 300,000 cases that are diagnosed every year. Now that's diagnosed. You look at someone like you or me that went how long undiagnosed because I never saw a tick. I had the bullseye and never showed anybody. I just thought it looked like a pretty Target ad on my rib cage, never thinking that I got stung. And everybody said, there's no Lyme in Montana. But I actually, the first time was Montana, second time was Arizona. But I lived in Montana. So no one had the mindset, but it's everywhere. It's worldwide. And it's a huge toxin. And then when you have heavy metals or mold, they're also co-infections that are super toxic. So you're building that bucket that's not even your fault a lot of the time. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
You should have mentioned that with my toxic bucket. Is that not all of it's our fault. Not all of it is in our control. Like it
exactly.
really isn't. I mean, to your point about vector borne, I mean, I can tell you, I never remember a tick bite. I never had a bullseye, and that's also not super uncommon.
No,
And
50%
yeah,
of the people.
I mean, and if it is a tick, if it's a nymph tick, those are the size of a poppy.
Poppy seed.
Yeah, like
You can't see them.
there's no way to see them. And this time of year, April, May is when many of the nymph ticks are out. Like, and again, that's not your fault. But if those get in your bucket, if mold gets in your bucket, if something tick-borne or vector-borne gets in your bucket, like or other bacterial infections get into your bucket or other unknown viruses, or even heavy metal exposures, like exposures in your air, food, water, like ones you just don't necessarily know about. Those get in your bucket. Your bucket is already getting pretty full without even the intentional, like mindful, aware, even informed decisions.
Yeah,
And you don't know that you've got mold exposure. You don't know that you have some of these bacterial infections laying dormant. And then you add something else in, that something else is what can really tip that bucket over. And
absolutely.
that's what I think that's again where I love to like connect with clients on, is because so much of it's not your fault. Like I actually I feel very empowered with the fact that I did know so much about Lyme and Lyme co-infections. And in fact, I self-diagnosed myself with Bartonella months before doctors, including Western and functional medicine, were like, yeah, that's it. It took me continuously pushing to find somebody who would say, yeah, you're right. And not for that positive affirmation, but when I finally found somebody who was like, no, you're crazy. That's not it. This is just stress. Like you've just had a stressful year. And I'm like, I had a stressful year, but let me tell you, I knew my body. This is not just, and they're
Mhm.
like, yeah, and you're healthy and you know about toxins, you do all these things. You don't need to worry, you're fine. I'm like, I'm definitely not fine. I know I'm not fine. But that's what I love to like connect with people on, is there is so much out there that might not necessarily be your fault, and there's so much out there that we don't even talk about, right?
Absolutely.
We don't like, I think water or even certain chemicals like PFAS are now finally starting to be talked about, but they've really been around for a long time, and they're getting more into commerce now, and sometimes we don't even know it. Companies constantly change their formulas. I can tell you this all the time. I mean, I've I've used products that were safe and were fine, and then one day I go buy it. I'm like, ha, change their ingredient list on me. You know?
They do. They do. When you have it's you're constantly reading labels. And if you I just want to stop you really quickly just so to clarify for people that aren't familiar with PFAS, what those are, what you're referring to.
Yeah, per and polyfluorinated substances. So what this is, it PFAS are, they're also known as forever chemicals because they don't leave your body, they don't leave the environment. And they are found in so many, they're found in our water, they're found in our soil. They are, when you think about products in our homes, the most common place you'll find them is anything that is nonstick cookware or waterproof or stain proof. So, like stain proof or waterproof furniture, rain jackets, rain boots, Teflon cookware. I mean, that's probably the big one that most people might know about. But they do leach into your products. They get onto your clothing. They get into your skin, and I mean, they're found in 99% of our bodies. And it's really only been in, I would say, the past handful of years that they're starting to get talked about because they cause cancer, they cause infertility,
Mhm.
they cause a number of health impacts.
So for me, like I was actually cooking last night. I have a stainless steel pan that I love. Now, stainless pretty safe. Tell
Yeah.
me stainless is safe. Okay, thank you. It's become my favorite pan, but you have to put the oil in there and get it hot. It's very otherwise it's a bitch to clean. That's what I found, and everything sticks unless you do it perfectly.
Yep.
So, but I've had, for 13 years my Teflon pans. And last night I do my food prep, so I've got like 3 pans going. So I was using a couple of those, and it was going through my head talking to you today. Going, actually need some new pots and pans because they're like 13 years old and everything's starting to stick. And I thought I'm going to ask her tomorrow. So it's funny that you brought it up about the Teflon. What is the safest type of cookware to go with? Say I'm going to get some new stuff. So stay the hell away from the Teflon and go for the stainless then.
So what you want to stay away from is nonstick, ceramic nonstick. If you
Oh,
see non,
ceramic too.
yeah, so if it's pure, this is where it gets a little sciencey, and I try not to get too sciencey with people, except I have to because of the way
Sure.
marketing works. So ceramic nonstick is risky because the ceramic that is used is a very thin coating, and it scratches so easily. And after you have that one scratch, you're exposing those toxic layers below it. And it happens very fast. And my belief is that when you buy good cookware, it should honestly last you a lifetime. But there is, because nonstick, like PFAS, are now getting all this bad attention, there's a lot of, and I'm using air quotes, healthy ceramic nonstick companies coming out. I see them everywhere. And it's just clever greenwashing, safe washing, marketing that is out there that is claiming it is safer.
And it's not, is what you're
It
saying.
is not. And I am very passionate about this.
Okay.
You can tell I'm a passionate person. And
Yeah.
I do love talking about it though, because again, if I didn't know better, that's the stuff I would have gone to buy. It's usually green, like it's
Even has a green label, like
yeah,
on there saying it's, yeah.
totally. It has green label, or it might even have the word green in the name.
Yeah.
I've seen it everywhere. But so to answer your question, what is the safest? It depends on what you want to cook, but generally speaking, it's going to be stainless steel. It'll be carbon steel, cast iron, or generally speaking, like the three holy grails. If you're looking more at bakeware, glass is great. That's personally what I end up using. I get
Yes.
a lot of pushback from people on, oh, well, I can't cook eggs or meat on any of those. They always stick. And without getting too sciencey here, I'll say the reality is all of this can be nonstick if with cast iron and carbon steel, you season it right. But it's also about cook temperature and how you're cooking it. Most of us are used to just cranking up the heat on everything. Like we want the water to boil the quickest. We want the pan.
When everything now.
Yeah, we want everything now. But if you know how to cook with these pans, the right oils to use and the right temperature, it can all be nonstick. I promise you. And I say this because I love to cook. My longtime boyfriend and partner is in product development for food. So like we're always cooking up recipes, and I can promise you everything can be made nonstick using safe cookware, safe bakeware.
Agree.
It's just, it comes down to that.
Yeah.
And the best part is most of these, if you treat them well, they truly will last you a lifetime. So if you care more about sustainability than food safety or like the safety of ingredients, you should purchase it once and it'll last you a lifetime. I mean, that's why some people will talk about, oh, I have my grandmother's cast iron pan. Well, it's probably because she seasoned it right and now you can pass it on. And most of these are actually less expensive
They
than
are.
than like nonstick and all this other stuff that you would have to throw out along the way, because it, even safety aside, it damages quickly. Like you're scratching, you scratch it to pieces. And that is like the other piece I love to tell in this world of like toxins education is it honestly doesn't always have to be more expensive, which is what I think we're trained to think. Oh, if I'm going to buy something healthier or safer, it's so much more expensive. And I thrive on helping people save money on this because I'm my dad's daughter. Like, he taught us about deals and budgets and everything else growing up. But I get a kick out of that. Like, I truly like, right? Like, it's that, like, we all have those like little secret things that get us all giddy and excited. I'm like, I just
Yeah.
so much money.
So exactly.
If you are in the space in your life or your lifestyle choices where you're working on your cookware and you're like, you know what, it's time for me to go get a safer pan, just go to my website. I've already thrown them all up there because, again, a lot of what I love doing is just educating people and making sure that I'm as accessible as possible to people, and this information is as accessible as possible to people.
I love it. Love it. And I, to backtrack on your talking about the cooking and the nonstick, when I first got the stainless steel pan, because I'm a foodie show, the food competition shows, they're my jam.
Yep.
And so I see them cooking in the stainless. So I go get the stainless steel pan. Everything stuck. It was awful because I would just put the oil in, not let it. And then as I kept watching, I can't even remember what it was. It was a couple of years ago. And because I had this stainless pan for several years, just sitting there because everything sticks. I hate it. And it was terrible to clean. And the key to the stainless was to get the oil in there. And you don't need a lot, but you have to get the oil and you have to let it get hot. And once it gets hot, the only time things stick are at the very end. And I do meat in there all the time. I do veggies. I'm allergic to eggs, so I can't tell you any eggs. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that sticks. And then you just take the stainless steel scrubber, little stainless thing. It wipes clean. That pan has been black at times, and it looks like it's brand new, where those damn Teflon pans scratched up, suck. I'm tossing those today. Thank you very much. After you're talking about this, I'm not even going to bother using them anymore, but you absolutely can use these other pans, and same with the glassware. It's all, that's what I bake with as well. So I love that tidbit in there. So that was a good juicy one as we're talking about food. So moving on past that, let's get into specifics. And this shocked me. So I of course, did the heavy metal testing a couple of years ago, and I had arsenic through the roof. Now, I came from a town in Montana called Anaconda. Okay, Anaconda, I'm going to bitch you out here because I hated it there. Everybody knows it. I hated it. But it was an old mining town, copper mine. So it's loaded with arsenic everywhere. They went and dug up every yard, everything Arco did, and had to clean it out from the arsenic. I mean, I saw so many things up there with people. I thought, how the hell do you have all these health issues? This is just bizarre. But then I'm down here and I tested elevated arsenic there, but I come back here and I'm testing elevated arsenic here. And I just found out that they inject it into chicken. Am I right there? And it's in water. That there was like,
Yeah. So
I'm we're
chicken, I think, is debatable.
okay.
I think it depends on the source of the chicken, depending on where it's coming from. I mean, I can talk about chicken. I can also talk about all day. Like I said, I've been to every feedlot, like slaughterhouse. Like I can tell you exactly what they eat and how it's made. I think that's a little bit more debatable personally.
Okay.
However, arsenic is definitely found in food. For example, rice is
Brown rice, especially, right?
is very high in arsenic. And again, you and I talked a little bit about this before, but this is where I balance myself out. I'm not saying don't go eat rice, right? That I mean, rice is it's a fine grain to go eat. But from a food standpoint, arsenic tends to be very high in rice. Other places that you'll find it are definitely in water. It's in the soil. And the reason I mention the soil is because this gets into natural versus synthetic. So just because something is natural does not necessarily mean it's always safer, especially if it is, grown in the ground and it's something that can absorb what's in the soil. So arsenic also ends up in a lot of beauty care products, especially in the natural category, if these companies are
Wow.
screening it. But that's why it's also found in water, right? Like a lot of our water, think about your water supply. And this is why I love talking about water too with clients who get to the point of wanting to know what's in their water, is because this is again one of those things that's not necessarily in our control. Because if you have a well, like where's the aquifer? And like where you are in Montana, if you hypothetically were on a well, it's possible that that arsenic was getting into your aquifer, right? And then getting
Hmm.
into your water, getting then into your body. But that can also happen with public water supply, depending on where the source is and depending what might be running off into the water. So those are some key places, that arsenic is found that you might not necessarily think of. I think it's more I don't want to say obvious, but it can be more obvious in a sense if you're in an old mining community. It's, oh, this makes sense
Yeah.
that it's here.
Yeah.
But it does pop up in other things. There's also certain plants and certain certain foods that, like rice, just absorb
Just
it more
pulls it in.
easily. And if there's a higher concentration of arsenic there for any number of reasons, it could be, what's polluting the soil. It could be if it's in a community like there. Like I'm sure where you were in Montana, there were probably people who still farmed, and it's quite possible that arsenic was getting absorbed into a lot of those foods that they were growing as well.
Wow. Is this what I said? Like the last time we talked, I was just like, what? And so, and again, it's not saying don't ever eat rice, but maybe don't eat rice on a daily basis, or be careful of the types of rice. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read, brown rice tends to be one of the higher contents of it. And water. Do water filters help with filtrating some of that arsenic out, or are they effective?
Certain filters and high quality filters. I could talk an entire podcast about water.
Which we may have to do.
Yeah, so which you may have to do. In a nutshell, your in-fridge filters, your Brita filters, they're not gonna filter out arsenic. They're not. Like, I actually somebody is gonna probably push back on me on this, but I consider those more like water purifiers. Like, they might take out the the minerality in it. So that
Chlorine.
yeah, and, like, they maybe chlorine. It depends on the type of filter, but most of those filters this is where I get into, oh, I'm saving people money. Like, sometimes you do need to spend more to save more in the long run. If you're spending 50 bucks every time to like for an in-fridge water filter, I often tell clients like, if I were you, what I would do is set that money aside and put it in a bucket to go buy a really good filter that you can, if you're renting, that you can install a countertop, like kitchen countertop filter. Or if you own your own home, you can put in, an under the sink filter, or we can look at whole house filters. But most of our water contamination comes through the tap, right? Like and it is different if you're on well water versus city water. And that's where like testing is so important because our water is just like our bodies. It is uniquely different. And the reason it is because it's not just the main source and what happens at a water treatment facility or in your well, but things in our homes can also impact the water. The types of pipes we have, the types of fixtures we have. And so it's really important, in my opinion, to properly test your water. Like your specific water out of the tap. Find out what's in your water, and then you know exactly what to filter it out. But yes, long story short, you can absolutely filter out arsenic. You just need the right filter. But first, you need to find out if arsenic's even a concern because I've had many clients go to me like, I want to filter out like all these heavy metals in my water. I'm like, oh, do you know that you have lots of heavy metals in your water? Well, no, but they're not good for you. Well, okay, well, let's first find out if that's even a problem. And same thing with like chlorine. So if you're on public water, the major, I would say, chemical contaminants or chemically added treatments can be chlorine, chloramine, fluoride's a big one. And I would say chlorine, chloramine, everybody wants to filter out. Fluoride can be a bit more contentious, especially if you like at public health side of things, dentist side of things. My world of toxins, we all view fluoride a little bit differently. But chlorine and chloramine, we don't need those in our water. They're not good for our hair. They're not good for our skin. We breathe in those filters, like they are just not good for us. But you need a specific type of filter for chlorine, and you need a more specific type of filter for chloramine. And for people who don't know what chloramine is chlorine plus ammonia. And
Oh, wow.
And so that is just harder to filter out of your water.
Okay.
And that gets by and some communities use just chlorine it's an antibacterial, right? To kill off the bacteria. Some use chloramine and some use both. And until you know what is being used in your water, which actually isn't too hard to figure out, and I can share that tidbit, like pro tip in a second, then you really don't know what filter to go buy. And your basic filters that you are buying either for your fridge or Brita or some of these other ones out there, they're just not going to filter that out. They're just not a high enough technology to do that. But my big tip for people, and this is something I help my clients pull just as part of my services, but you can go pull, if you're on city water, you can go pull your water quality testing report from your city.
As I was going to ask you how to test.
Yeah, and so this is not super comprehensive, and I still encourage additional testing because of one, what happens at the water treatment facility to get to your house. There's sewer impacts, there's your pipe impacts, your fixture impacts. So like your water is still going to be different than this water quality report. But also these water quality reports, they are not testing for everything under the sun. They truly aren't. Like they are, but what they are going to tell you is, do they treat with fluoride? Are they using chlorine? Are they using chloramine? What is the source of the water? Like, where is this coming from? Is it groundwater? Is it surface water? Is it coming from rivers? Is it coming from a reservoir? Because all of those matter for what could be contaminating and actually in your water. And so what you can do though, every city is supposed to publish that annually. Sometimes they might miss a year or so, but you can go grab that for free. In Denver, if you know you are on Denver public water supply,
Mhm.
look up Denver water quality report and they'll spit it out for you. Sometimes you might need someone like me to help interpret that, but
Mhm.
generally speaking, it'll at least tell you what they are treating in your water. So I think that that is really important to know. And then as far as further testing, I personally love a lab called TapScore, and that's the one that I recommend working with. I have a small distributor discount that I can pass on, but what I love about them
Awesome.
is that they are completely third party. They don't sell filters. They're very education focused as well. So if you don't want to work with someone like me, but you're like, hey, I think I'll try to DIY this, then you can totally go DIY yourself and they're pretty good. But what I love is that they don't sell filters. And the reason I love that is there's a lot of water testing companies out there that also sell filters, right? And it just isn't quite as unbiased when you go
Mhm.
through that situation.
Totally makes sense. And do you work at all because another thing I dealt with was thallium, which they put in rat poisoning. It's a metal in the in the earth, and it seems to have an affinity for kale,
Mm-hmm.
predominantly kale.
And sometimes mushroom is another big place that it can be surprising.
Oh, no, I hadn't heard that because how yeah, I ended up with it through if you guys know all the toxins I've the, gadolinium from MRI contrast.
Wow, yeah.
Oh, I was seriously poisoned with it in 2018. I couldn't walk for 7 weeks. I had to have crutches. It was for a contrast injection in my hip. And within 8 hours, the pain in my bone and skin, and it was unbearable. I couldn't walk, sleep, sit. There was nothing I could do. The ER went to them after 4 days, shot me up with Toradol, the max amount they could give me, and it wouldn't touch it. And I would sit and watch my quad muscles just going like this. It apparently it got out, it was supposed to stay in the joint. It's not supposed to be toxic, but I say it's Russian roulette that you're supposed to pee it out, within the 8 hours, and there is gadolinium retention, and that's what I got. And it stores in the bone, the skin, and the brain. But we thought, so I couldn't cook or anything, so I would send because I couldn't drive, my friends would go to the store for me, and I said, "Just get me kale, get me organic kale." I was thinking detox in my head, right? I didn't know I
Yep,
wasn't doing genetics, I didn't know any of this stuff.
yep.
That's all I was thinking was, "Oh, these good veggies to help detox." Because you always see a kale detox salad. That was where I was. I was just a basic health coach. I didn't know this shit, right? T and, next thing, I'm getting these, like, red sores, and my hair is coming out in clumps. You could see through my scalp. I couldn't sleep, like I said, I tried everything, and my naturopath at the time said, "Well, let's do a heavy metal test." Well, not only did the gadolinium come back, and there's no safe amount of gadolinium, none, but it was 2.5 times what they considered the safe amount. It did not, and this was a month later, it didn't leave, and but my doc calls me and she said, "Where are you?" Because I was in Anaconda, she was in Helena, and she said, "Where are you?" And I just happened to be up in Helena that day, and she said, "You need to come and see me right away." And I thought, "Oh my god, the gadolinium's off the chart, I'm gonna die." Because by this point, I was on crutches and I was able to drive. Like, still, I was, the doctor that the orthopedic that I went to when I was going back to him and saying, "I can't walk." Like, I couldn't walk unless my leg was straight out to the side. I couldn't get it under me. And he literally told me that I was crazy and it was anxiety. And he said, "It's Lyme, Susan." I said, "Dude, I've had Lyme for 11 years. I know what Lyme is. This isn't Lyme. None of this was Lyme." And so we went to her office and she said, "Yeah, the gadolinium is high." But she said, "Your thallium is off the page." So we called the lab, which was doctor's data at the time. We called the lab and put them on speaker while I was there in the office. And the first thing that the person at the lab said was, "Have you been eating organic kale from California?" I was like, "Bag a day." I was all proud. I'm detoxing. And she said, "Well, what we've found or been finding is that, well, thallium, the kale cruciferous vegetables, but specifically kale and some broccoli. Those were the two I was eating, but predominantly kale, have this affinity for thallium, pulling it out of the soil. And
California.
And the California, they said, from all the fracking and everything else. And I said, you have to be kidding me. And she said, you need to get, she said, you're acutely poisoned, just like you've been eating rat poisoning. So I was literally dying from the two of these. Had to get special approval to use radiogardase or Prussian blue, which is the only thing that chelates the thallium. Very specific program, $900 a month. The government hoards it for radiation poisoning. You can't make this stuff up, people. Like all this, I found out about this. And my naturopath was telling me, she said, you know what? I have clients. She had one woman specifically that was having miscarriages. And every day she had kale juice or a kale smoothie. And it clicked for her too. She said, I had no idea. And so again, some of these things we think are so healthy. Now, have I eaten kale since 2018? Yes. I try not to be in fear of it, but I mean, that going through all that chelating both of those things, I had to do at the same time, and I became a normal person again. As you can see, all my hair's grown back and then stuff, right? but it's I've eaten it maybe 5-6 times over the past 6 years. Just knowing that is empowering to me, that it's not something I'm going to go eat every day. I don't, and again, that's where the empowerment comes in, is not the fear of it, but hey, if you're somebody out there, look on your packaging, because even in the grocery stores, right, it'll tell you where things are sourced, or you can ask them. And it was specifically, like you said, the organic kale from California that can be just so full of the thallium. And if you take that on a daily basis and you're noticing things, it may be something totally different than you're expecting. Plus, if your detox systems are not revved up or optimal, and I see most, like we see these symptoms that people are having, and then look at their genetics and say, like for me, I was under-methylating, very low glutathione levels, which is your master antioxidant, huge part in detoxification. Some people don't produce well or retain the amounts. And some pretty simple things you can do to work with that to optimize these things. Like you said, the more you can see what's going in your bucket. So do I add kale to the bucket? Sure. Will I ever add gadolinium to the bucket and ever have an MRI contrast? No. And I tell people, again, Russian roulette, educate yourself. Mm-hmm. I just had that conversation the other night with someone, but that's I could be a whole other podcast on gadolinium, but I saw these things. And again, like the mercury with the dental amalgams.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. And you can't just go to a regular dentist to get them out. That sick for 2 months from just isn't it just they said when you go to take it out is the most toxic time because of the airborne.
Mm-hmm. It's basically the airborne exposure that happens in your mouth. And, oral microbiome is definitely not my expertise, but I will tell you, oral microbiome is highly, highly undervalued and undereducated on. I mean, I think as consumers, or especially if you go to a dentist, like you might know, oh, I need to keep my teeth healthy, because we know that like gums and things like that can be linked to heart disease, but we don't
heart,
think
kidneys,
about the bacteria in our mouth. We don't think, again, mercury or other things that happen in our mouth and how that can impact the rest of our body, and not just your heart. Like it can impact like neurological issues. It can cause nerve pain. There's so many links with your oral microbiome, and we don't look at it. I mean, even smaller things like paying attention to your tongue. Do you have oral thrush? Do you have a white tongue? Like that can be linked to other things going on systemically. And so you probably had to go to a biological dentist, I assume.
I did. My regular dentist took one out, and the next day I had all this stuff coming up from my lungs, and I was sick. He just took one out because he said, well, let's start with one. And after that, he thought I was crazy. So I went to the biologic dentist, and they put a whole apparatus on. You have your own breathing apparatus. They're in hazmat, total hazmat, giving you charcoal, vitamin C, great for detox. Vitamin C, NAC, selenium, huge parts for detox. But they give you all this and say that, and that's when he said this is the worst part is the beginning when they're first coming out because of the airborne, and then you're good after that. But yeah, it was a crazy experience.
I mean, and that's exactly it. And this is also the Russian roulette of it all, right? Some other people might have been totally fine or like fine. It sounded like you had a reaction pretty early on, but other people might have been fine, either fine, period, end of sentence, or fine for a long time before that was adding to their toxin bucket, right? And
Yeah.
this applies for so many things. I mean, you probably heard it. Like people are like, oh, well, so and so did this and they were fine. Okay, well, that was so and so.
Don't compare. We're all different.
You're all
All different.
And I know you talk about this all the time, but it's just like why some diets work for you, some workouts work for you, they don't work for other people. The sleep pattern works for you, but it doesn't work for this person. Like I the same thing applies with lifestyle choices, behaviors like whether you get mercury or don't get mercury, like
Absolutely.
different procedures. Like everybody's body is different and there's so many things that you just cannot accurately predict. Again, for me, like we talked about earlier on, like I had a very high stress year last year, and that is likely part of what tipped off my Bartonella. It's just my body was doing great. I've handled stress before, but for whatever reason, that stress plus this underlying bacteria plus everything else going on in my life, my stress toxins, because those matter too, could have been 3/4 full and then something else happened and it just overflowed. And so even though I've got my environmental toxins really low, stress toxins, social toxins, those also all add up, right? And so it's hard to accurately predict what's going to push it over. And for you, your body was just like, heck no,
Oh
not
yeah.
this.
Plus I was a cop. It detox
Right.
stress. Like
Yeah.
I
Like,
hated where I lived. It was all of
yeah.
it. But
Exactly. Game over. And that's why I have so many people sometimes that self doubt themselves when they're like, well, somebody, I had this done, but when Sue also had it done and they were fine or did this and they were fine.
perfectly fine.
But I did have this done, but I should be fine. And it's like, well, maybe your body just wasn't fine. Like that just wasn't okay for your body. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it comes back to, hey, and I don't use like Russian roulette, loosely, but hey, sometimes just an exposure to your body is just too much. That's why some of us have
Absolutely.
allergies and asthma and things like that, and others don't, right? It's just
Mhm.
our bodies are all really unique that way.
So a couple things. First, I want to touch on that. I have a client that I'm working with right now, and we start working together, and she had a major histamine reaction. Major with the eyes, actually 2, and I'm seeing so much more histamine. I've been putting information out there to my pH people, my colleagues, and trying to figure out, is anybody else seeing this? Because and it's with a lot of my thyroid hormone people, with Amy's especially, that the histamine reactions are through the roof. And they could be perfectly fine, but all of a sudden, I mean, I had 2 of them with eye things, and we know there's, you know, a lot of the healthy foods are higher histamine. It was spinach, strawberries, bananas, avocado, right? They're higher histamine. And so people start eating these and eating more of these, and that histamine bucket overflows. But I don't know if that's anything that has to do with this, but I'm super curious, for one, about the histamine part of it with the toxins, because histamine has its place in our bodies, but when that bucket overflows again. But the other thing is, especially like I go through a DNA read with someone, and when I'm through the toxicants and inflammation report, actually it's through the whole damn report that I'm stressing. I get stressing literally going back to, I say it's because I typically, my 3 base are food or nutrition, micronutrients, and then your toxicants and inflammation. And the resounding commonality is stress. And that's what you had, that seems to be a theme with you as well. And one of the ways I tell them, like, food, good antioxidant rich foods, the right supplements. People don't need to be taking every supplement under the sun. Take the ones that you actually need to address issues that you may actually need to address, right? That's the other thing. And then I say, proper hydration. Now it's going to be with proper water filters. um, but the one main component that I have that I type up on every freaking report, stress. And stress is anything creating a reaction in the body, right? So people say, well, I don't have any stress. So when someone tells me they have no stress, first, you're lying and you don't realize it, because there's good stresses and bad stresses, right? Like the job can be a bad stress. Exercise is a great stress, but yet you still need recovery from it. Us talking, we're reacting. It's a great stress we're going through. Our bodies are loving this, but we still need downtime. You still need to recover. So that's a huge component. People don't sleep. I was with a friend the other night, and I get maybe 6 hours of sleep a night, and it's not good quality. Or they'll say, oh, I slept for 8 hours. Well, what was your quality of sleep? The quality of sleep sucks. Under 6 hours a night chronically is the life expectancy of someone with cardiovascular disease or a smoker. Sleep is important, but stress. So you talk about stress toxins. I would love for you to elaborate away on this one, because it's the one thing that I just hammer to people is the stress, and how I'd love to hear how you're talking about that this is a toxin, because I'm going to jam on this, which I think other people will. So
Totally. And I will
take
tell
the
you
floor.
that I am by no means like the stress hormone like expert or anything. But here's the thing about stress, right? I think everybody has gone to the doctor at some point or talked to a friend at some point, and the doctor's, you need to reduce your stress, right? Or your friend is, you need to reduce your stress. You've got a lot going on. Fill in the blank for the reason, right? There's so many reasons. It can be work. You just had a baby, you're moving, kids, or just life events, unexpected expenses. I mean, the economy right now is really stressful to a lot of people. You go to the grocery store, your food bill, like
Social media.
I mean,
They wake up to stress.
totally. So, I mean, I will tell you, I am kind of a bad millennial that way, and even a bad businesswoman sometimes, because I am not great at social media. Like I you and I connected through a Facebook group that I'm admin of, and I love that. But because I'm already on Facebook a lot for that group, that tends to be my main social media platform. Like, I wish I were better at Instagram, but as a solo entrepreneur, like, you can't do it all. And,
No.
I know I need to outsource that eventually and get that done, but I've picked my lane, and I know not everybody's on Facebook. I get that. But I have just learned from my own stress level, okay, this is where I focus. If I'm hanging out on Instagram, good job, Elizabeth. I'm doing great, proud of myself. But I've noticed in times of high stress, even I am more sensitive to information. And, there's lots of talk and discussions about like, so, and again, I came from marketing, right? Like I wasn't a digital marketer per se, but you know how ads work. Some we all notice trends on social media for like certain posts, and that like I've seen a lot more posts lately that's like sadder information, and
Mhm.
I've shared with people like, this sucks. This is
Yeah. I don't want to see
this
this.
is not helping my mental health. Like this is like, not good for me. And then one of the certain people I care about, it is so, you can only handle so much sad news, right? There's like we need,
Mhm.
I personally, but I think we all need like connection, and I think social media can be great for that. Like
Agree.
there's so many people,
Yeah.
but if you log on and all you're seeing is like bad news, like yikes, that is definitely like stress in your buckets. But I think the other thing
Mhm.
that comes up so often is, and I hear this from a lot of my clients I work with who are chronically ill, and sometimes they don't have a diagnosis. So they're like, well, my doctor just says I need to reduce stress, or my mom says I need to reduce stress. But what do they often tell you when you need to go reduce stress? They're like, oh, go sign up for a yoga class, go do this. And like, what are you doing? You're adding to your to do list, which is just adding another thing to do. And then if you don't go do it, you're like, oh, I was supposed to go do yoga. And now
Then
here,
there's another stress.
and it's like another stress. And it's no. What can you literally take away? What can you control? Because I mean, it's life. Let's face it. Like last year when I had such a stressful year, there were so many things out of my control, right? Like my partner lost his job, and then, my animals, like, each had things. They're all senior animals, like, they all had things, and then we had deaths in the family, and then, and then randomly my car decided to, just not wanna run, and it was, like,
Mhm.
running fine, like, those are all just, like, life things, but when stuff like that happens is when you need to be in my opinion, extra mindful of who are you hanging out with? How are you spending your free time? How are you feeding yourself? And like we say, oh, make sure you practice self-care, but like really what does that mean? If that means that you need to make your world really small and like just focus on your loved ones for a time period, like that is okay. Like I think the way society is now, and going back to the connectedness, like we're expected to respond to a text like right away, or all of these messages right away. I actually feel empowered when I'm like, you know what? It is my weekend. I'm not responding to any text this
I
weekend.
love it.
Like that. And that's, I mean, some people call it boundaries. Like you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, stress can be a trigger for so many things in your toxin bucket. Like if it, like truly, truly, whether it's chemical toxins, like other, environmental toxins out of your control, but stress is what can actually push that bucket over.
Thank
And
you.
like
Yes.
1000%. Like it did it for me, right? I mean, the doctors I've seen are like, well, at least you already filter your water, you already eat well,
Mhm.
you at least you're already doing all of these things so you don't have all these other toxins in your body that while you're trying to get better, your body isn't trying to fight and deal with these too. But at the end of the day, you need to reduce your stress. And also reducing stress looks very different for every single person. And I think
Absolutely.
that is, I think, also very important is how you detox. And I mean, I know we talk about internal detox, but even like how you
Detox from the environment around you.
absolutely how you
Yeah.
do that is
Yeah.
also equally important. And that is very different based on, I mean, you can probably get into it from a genetic standpoint, but it varies by personality type. I mean, extrovert, introvert, like how you like to spend your time. Like some people, it might be going to read. Some people, it's getting out into nature. Some
Yeah.
people, it's like, I just need to go watch a funny movie and laugh.
And I need
So
to move.
yeah, or like exactly. For me, it's like I need to go if I go for a walk in nature, like I feel centered, I feel
Yes.
grounded. It's like a reset, but that is not one size fits all either. But at the end of the
Mm-mm.
day, like I think that's the important message is that stress really isn't about like, oh, you need to do yoga or you need to do this. It is about reducing things, and it's about reducing things that you have more control over because that's again where the empowerment piece is, but that's also where your control is. And I do think I do believe like it is quickly said, like, oh, like stress is making you feel this way. Stress could be the trigger. Stress could be the thing pushing
Mhm.
you over, but
Mhm.
there's often other things that are in your bucket as well at that time.
And people don't realize stress lowers the immune system.
Totally. 1000%.
So you can see when if you keep lowering this immune system and they drink, right? You got alcohol, which another immune system killer. So you have stress, booze, lack of sleep. So the immune system keeps going down and then you're bringing these other toxins in. Well, I mean, alcohol, brain toxin. You've got crap in the food, you've got crap in the environment. So we're doing these things that lower the immune system, and we're surrounded with things that attack the immune system. And there's the autoimmune, right? And all these other the chronic disease that just comes in. And so it totally, interesting. I did my first little manifestation challenge. This is when I started getting into the law of attractions 2 years ago. And it was like day 4 of this 20, I think it was 21 days. Day 3 or 4, it was detox from the environment. I'm going, this is stupid, right? Because hey, this is the activator of me. Everything. Everybody hears on every podcast. This is stupid. Okay. And then I eat crow every fucking time. And and sorry, shield your children. I just said the F bomb, but it's every time. And the first thing was stop watching the news. And I was a news watcher every morning. The first thing I do is get up on the news. And what is it like? And how long? Like for the past how many years? It's been all this political vitriol from each side, and so there's hate, 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 hate. coming from, and I would start the day pissed off and just angry. That's how I started the day. And I thought, I can't go a day without my news. It's been 2 years. I think I've watched the news maybe 4 times. I know that what I need to just kind of pay attention to what's going on. I thought
Yeah.
my whole stress level came down, and I said, I like my bubble of happy. I can control what I'm bringing into my bubble. I don't get sick, knock wood. I very rarely get sick. And the other thing that I thought was when you were saying how sometimes, we need to take that time to ourselves to get away from everything. And people expect us to be responding. And I will tell you, I went into a self-imposed cave from about December until I to April 1st. No, not even. It was just like 3 weeks ago when I popped out. But this is when I said I have to, because I know me, I don't focus. That's my connector brain. I have a hard time focusing. So I had to get rid of everybody and everything around me to be able to focus on putting this podcast together, which is my labor of love. It's a lot of work, and it took a lot of focus. But you know, people want to know what's wrong with you or why, they get offended that you back off. But sometimes we shouldn't have to explain to people that sometimes you just have to take some time to just regenerate yourself because it's been too much. And I'm in an amazing place now. It's like I popped out one day. It was just like, I'm ready to emerge again. World, I'm back. But for those 4 months, I joke around, but it's true. Like I was happy in an Epsom salt bath on a Saturday night, Friday night. I didn't want to go out. There were very few people I could even be around. I did better around people I didn't know because they didn't have expectations of me. And, so I did better talking to some newer people or different people that I would meet like you because you didn't know me and be like, Susan, you're different or whatever. I didn't know. So, and it was like, I felt like I detoxed for those 4 months. And so we all, again, we're so different. Like you said, like even you call it like personality types and we call it the health types with the PH 360. It's biologically, you're a biological type that needs that away time and to be just at peace with nature with too much stimulation is going to hit you too hard. And I'm the opposite. But then even that opposite has that bucket of people and stimulation where you just have to stop. So I just loved how you touched on all of that. And it made so much sense to me with my personal stuff. It sounds like we're very similar there. We have a lot. It's crazy. What are we talking? It's like, I get it. I get it. So just a couple more things I want to touch on. The first one is our little surprise little tidbit. I want to touch on that. And then if you can give us like, where are some of the most common places we might find some of the most common things that we don't realize? But the first one, so here we are sitting in, Colorado, which is like the weed freaking capital of the world, I think, maybe next to the Netherlands or Amsterdam. But this made my jaw drop because everybody talks about, cannabis and all. And I have actually I have a cannabis panel in my DNA. I've never done one. I've never had anybody ask for it, but hey, it's available if you want to know how you react or what your propensities are. But it's talked about as the be all end all. It's very helpful as we've chatted about, very, very helpful for some people in some ways, but there are some hidden things here that people need to be aware of. Even as a cop, they'd say, when I was a cop, they'd be like, pot's nothing. It's harmless. It doesn't do anything. I'm like, well, then why are you doing it? Because it provides a high. So don't say it does nothing, because I did see some things out there that people don't want to believe, but you've got some info. So sit back, sit back and take this in.
Again, my disclaimer is I am not a cannabis expert. I am not, I want to set that bar high. But in my world, what I have often talked about people when it comes to cannabis, especially if certain chemicals or heavy metals are popping up on their charts, is that what most people don't know about cannabis is that it absorbs very high levels of heavy metals, pesticides, PFAS, and none of these are subject to like strict screening practices. And I can talk about strict screening practices all day long too, but they aren't. So you might not know that you're getting exposed. But the other thing that is really important to know is that there is an association between frequent high potency cannabis use and the onset of psychosis. And if you have an autoimmune disease or have a genetic predisposition to one, this is also at increased risk. And the reason I think that this is important, and I think probably why your jaw dropped, is because I think we both know people who might have chronic illness or chronic pain who take cannabis because it can make you feel better, whether it's the high or it takes away pain. But the other thing to know is that medical and recreational are very different. So recreational is, especially in the state of Maine, which is what I'm more familiar with right now, just because there's been some recent bills passed here. But medical is actually less regulated than recreational. So if you are somebody who uses cannabis and it helps you and it makes you feel better, you're actually better off going recreational route than medical route. And I can send you some links to drop too, but there's also a Maine Public Health Association actually recently posted this helpful list of questions to ask. So if you're somebody who is going to your dispensary and you want to make sure there's screening practices or testing practices, there's certain questions you can ask so that you know that you are buying the safest cannabis on the market.
Isn't that mind-blowing, people? Because that's the whole thing is CBD and cannabis. This is the be all end all. And does it matter the mode of ingestion, whether it's smoking, edibles, pill? I mean, do you know?
And again, I'm speaking about this a little bit more secondhand. My sister is Maine's executive director of public health, and so works for Public Health Association of Maine. And this is where I've really been learning a lot more on this regulation side of things. Again, I've always focused on the toxin side of things, right? Just like we talked about with plants and whatnot. Again, this is great at absorbing things from the soil. So great at that, which is important to know. But if you think about THC, like you see THC gummies, candies, treats, a lot of these products, I mean, even to kids, look like candy, right? They look like candies, they look like sweets. And so a lot of it is with the THC side of things, again, which is where it gets into medical. I think that, and again, that's where the high potency happens, because most people, like if you're just like smoking it, for example, a lot of the times it's more on recreational, not 100%, but less on medical. And so what a lot was being talked about was in regards to like gummies and more of those things where the THC, you might not necessarily know the THC level. It could say a low number, but if that company is not screening and testing, it could be 10 times what that level is. And just on the medical side, that's not required, at least in the state of Maine.
I just find that so fascinating. How even the medical is less regulated than the testing wise, recreational.
About this, I think that the reason, again, this is me. As soon as my sister told me this, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I bet most people do not know that medical is less regulated, because I think for most people intuitively, medical versus recreational, medical has stricter standards, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It must have stricter standards. And that is just not the case.
Wow.
And so that, again, that would be my message. And hey, just again, it's not like don't use it. If it works for you, great. But just be mindful that, again, just because something is natural does not mean that it is always safer. And you still need to ask questions and be aware of what is coming along with that. Just like you and kale and like thallium and everything else, right? Like, kale is great. Kale does has all these amazing benefits, but depending on the source of it and what it could be absorbing from the soil and the ground is also important. And when you think about, this bucket or even a scale, right? You might have all these amazing benefits from using this product. But if it's absorbing heavy metals, if it's absorbing pesticides, if it's absorbing PFAS, and those are getting into your body, like that's something to balance.
And on another end, where you're talking about um, regular testing of things, I found in dealing with elevated lead several years ago, as well, different teas, especially India and China, but between the pesticides and the heavy metals, people just go buy any brand of tea. The celestial seasonings, one of the worst, most toxic.
Teas, spices, herbs are all three
Yeah.
others that, and this is why I can go down so many rabbit holes in what I talk with people about, because, a common question, and I think this ties in with so much of what we talked about, is people are like, well, is this safe? And it's, well, what do you mean by safe? Because, right, I sound like a lawyer. Right?
It depends.
And that isn't to get sciencey with you, but safe has very different meanings, right? Like, again, we're often taught like natural, and all natural is like safe, but or even organic is like safer. But do you know the meaning? Like, do you know what those definitions are? Because I can tell you, especially working in the industry for so long, what organic means is different than what most consumers think. Same thing with natural. I think
The all natural label
like all
on
natural,
meat,
like, yeah,
all natural chicken. Well,
yeah.
yeah, no shit. Chicken's natural, but the stuff they put in it isn't.
Well, and that's it. Like, I mean, I can, yeah, we could talk about chicken all day long because, well, I will tell you, chicken is one of the products that, as I learned about, blew my mind. I was like, this is it. Again, I was working in it and I was getting angry. And so I can talk about chicken all day long. But again, what does that mean? What does it mean? And what does it mean to you to be safe? Are we just talking about the ingredient on its own? Because, right, if we're talking about organic kale, like on its own, yeah, it's safe. If you mean, is it safe and is it tested for heavy metals and could it have contaminants and all of these other things? Well, then that's a different story. I mean, that again, like this comes up with so many categories when I'm working with clients. Like we
Mhm.
talked about ceramic nonstick earlier. Is it safe? Probably for the first use, it's totally fine. But as soon as it gets to scratch or you've used it for a couple of months, it is definitely not safe. So,
It's just mind blowing to
right,
me.
that is, I think, such an important question for consumers when
Yeah.
they're asking about the safety or they're thinking about the toxicity. It goes into the source of it as well, right? Like seafood, again, is another one. Like seafood has amazing benefits for so many people. And I'm sure you can talk about the genetics there too. And like
Hmm.
people talk about Mediterranean diet and and all of those things. But some seafood, also is high in all of these contaminants or microplastics. And so it goes back to the source. And again, this is never to scare people, it's to get people to just like pause for a minute and
Hmm.
think and feel empowered. And when they go to the shelf at the store, they're shopping online, they're like, hey, I feel good. I feel like I have the right information to buy this product and feel good about the decision to put this in, on, or near my body.
You touched on the fish thing, and I'm a huge fish eater. Salmon, my cod. Yeah, I noticed huge benefits when I brought more fish in. Farmed versus wild. I mean, we absolutely want to avoid the farmed. Am I correct?
1000%. Yep. End of sentence. Farms should not be what you're coming, like what you're bringing into your home or bringing into your body for a number of reasons, but a lot of it goes back to the contaminant.
Yep. And this is what people like when you see salmon out there and you see it in the counters, unless it specifically says wild caught, this is your farm stuff.
Mhm.
I see that it's sold out at Costco and Whole Foods and everything. You're going to pay more for the wild, but you're going to pay less in the long run from not eating all the crap.
Mm.
So definitely I love that. So thanks for clarifying that because that's what I've been telling people is avoid the farm. You always want to go the wild caught. Okay, so could you give us like where you see maybe top makeups or top foods, top cleaning products? things like that. Maybe the most contaminated to the best choices, like from a crappy one to a good one, something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
In a few topics,
yeah.
categories.
And sometimes I would say it's easier to even talk about ingredients to avoid that are easy to find because
You're the expert. Do it.
yeah, well, and the reason for this is I think more, especially in this health space, right? More and more of us are getting attuned to look at ingredient labels, but most of us don't really know what we're looking at. And the reality is some of these names look really long and sciencey, and there used to be this rule that if it was like a long ingredient name, that it was bad for you. And I can tell you that is such a myth.
Or if you couldn't pronounce it. If you can't pronounce it, it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can't pronounce it, it's bad. And you know, there's 86,000 plus ingredients in use in US commerce today. Like it's impossible for me to know every single
Yeah.
one of them, especially not as a scientist, but I do know a lot of them. I know, again, contaminants, I know all of that. But for the average consumer, that is just not possible. And if you just judge it by the length or if you can pronounce it, you might actually be passing on an ingredient that is using, its scientific name, but is really something super safe and fine to use. And again, even ingredients, their names change, right? But I mean, that's happened in food, that's happened in personal care. So,
Yeah, look what they've done with high fructose corn syrup. Now
yeah,
it's corn sugar, all the different names to try to get it away from high fructose corn syrup so that people don't know.
all the time. Oh, this gets a bad name. So now we're going to give it this name or we're going to bury it or, oh my gosh. Oh, that's a whole other monologue. I got. So in personal care products, the biggest tip that I have is if there's one ingredient to avoid, it's fragrance. And when I say fragrance, it is the word fragrance slash perfume. And the reason is that is a huge chemical cocktail. Companies, because of a loophole tied way back to Estee Lauder days where they wanted to protect their formulation, companies can dump a bunch into fragrance and they don't need to disclose it. And even if you email them, they still don't need to disclose it. And oftentimes they'll say things like, well, it's an FDA recommendation, to protect this. And what can be in that one ingredient is truly hundreds to thousands of other ingredients.
Wow.
They can be endocrine disruptors, they can be carcinogenic. And so, and I would say right now, what is really tricky, and a lot of people probably know this, but like, there could be a safer natural brand and then they get acquired by a bigger company. And this is where I've been fooled in the past. Like maybe I didn't know it got acquired and I was like, hey,
Yep.
they used to list out like all of the fragrance ingredients and now they're using fragrance. And sometimes it's because they got bought out, or sometimes they're trying to protect margins or whatever it is. But in the world of transparency, which is, I think, what more consumers are demanding right now, if you're buying a product that uses fragrance or perfume and that company will not tell you what's in it, move along. There's plenty
Wow.
of products out there now that do not contain that. The other one that seems like very minor but is surprising is anything with paraben, as a suffix. And here's why. I I think we've talked about parabens for years. Like I remember being like way back in high school and you were looking for paraben free. And I found that just in my work, a lot of people think parabens are already banned. They're not banned.
No, they're not. That's why you have to see paraben free.
Yeah. And the thing is just because and so I would look for that as the suffix. If you find any ingredients with paraben on the end of it, put it back and I will tell you it pops up in quote unquote natural products, cruelty
Yep.
products, like all of this all of the time. And personal care products and specifically are very, very underregulated in the US. In a previous role that I had working in B2B, I actually did a whole presentation on the history of personal care product regulation for a group of entrepreneurs and small business owners. And it, you talk about jaw dropping. People are like, wait, it's been that long. Wait, that's how that worked. Wait, are you kidding me? And so just know that personal care products in the US are super, super underregulated. There's only around 30 ingredients that are banned or partially banned, and partially banned makes it even more complex for consumers, because what that means is the ingredients are banned in some products, but not in other products, so it doesn't have a halo effect. And so I'd say those two things, because they will always be on ingredient labels for personal care products. And when I say personal care, I'm talking about your moisturizers, your skincare, your cosmetics,
Shampoo.
toothpaste, shampoo, body wash, soap, deodorants. Those are the big things to know. When it comes to food, I would also say artificial colors and flavors. They are the same category right there. Natural flavors aren't much better.
Huge in glutamate. MSG, people, it starts
Yeah.
naturally, and then once the chemical process hits, it takes it a whole different. And people, the LaCroix waters, I used to drink those, couldn't figure out, I was getting headaches. I have major glutamate issue. It's natural flavors,
Yeah.
natural vanilla flavor, like any of these that says that. So I'm so glad that's part of that, because I've been preaching that.
I equate natural flavors, artificial flavors, and artificial colors as the same as fragrance. Like they're a dumping ground. Like you don't really know
Nope.
what's in it. And there are different rules and I won't get into the sciencey part of it, but there are different rules that companies need to follow for natural flavors versus artificial. But I can tell you, neither one are great. Like if you can, and they are harder to avoid, especially with processed types of
They are.
foods, and they end up on surprising ingredient labels. But like natural flavors, you can even find in our organic products. So like,
Absolutely.
so pay
Yep.
attention
Yep.
to those labels, like when it comes to food. And I know I said I talk about ingredients only, but I want to have a quick side tangent because I love talking about packaging as it relates to food too. And this is something I think a lot of people who sort of educate about ingredients or foods or nutrition don't really talk about. So, one thing when it comes to packaging around food is like glass is your best bet. Like, if you're buying tomato, like, especially if it's an acidic food, you absolutely want to buy that in glass first because acids will leach what is in the packaging into that product. So, if you are buying an organic ketchup or an organic tomatoes, if they are in an aluminum can, or if they are in plastic, they will absolutely leach those chemicals into the product. And it is, while it's organic ingredients, it is heavily contaminated. And so, generally speaking, I'll say glass first. Then, if something's not available in glass, usually Tetra Pak, especially if it's acidic,
Yeah.
Tetra Pak, while not as sustainable as glass, Tetra Pak is technically the second best. And then, aluminum cans after that. And I'll talk about aluminum cans in a second because that surprises people. And then after that is plastic. The thing with
Okay.
aluminum cans, and again, this is a little more sciencey, but we see BPA free all the time, right?
Mm.
But the reality is just because there's no BPA, there's usually other bisphenols in it. And bisphenols are hormone disruptors. Right? That's why we've been taught to avoid BPA all over the place. But just because it says BPA free, it's usually just some other type of bisphenol in it. The only exception to that so far, to my knowledge, is Eden Foods. They actually used a true natural liner in their can because that's what it is. You have the aluminum can, which a lot of people in the sustainability world are like, use aluminum, it's great, you can recycle it. Like, and that's all true. But that lining that is in those foods, including organic and natural, can contaminate the product inside. And again, my asterisk to that is Eden Foods. And they're mostly known for like beans and things like that.
Sure.
But they use like a true natural lining that I wish more companies would adopt. But that's again why Eden Foods is more expensive. So I know I talk about ingredients, but I love sharing that packaging tidbit with people because then when you go to the shelf, I think that's an important one. We touch on like cookware and kitchenware a bit. And so I think we probably mostly have that covered, but definitely avoid nonstick, ceramic nonstick. That's really important. Again, you also need to pay attention to liners in your appliances. And I'm going to make some people's hearts really sad, but
You're going to go air fryer? Are you going to talk air fryer? Because you're going to break my heart.
I can talk air fryer, but I won't go to the thing to know about air fryers is there are glass air fryers. I even have one on my website.
A glass air fryer?
Yes. And I know it's scary when people think about glass appliances. Trust me, I get it. I'm clumsy in the kitchen. Like, I love being in the kitchen, but I'm so clumsy. But people get worried about glass and breaking things. But there are glass air fryers, and those will be the safest. I mean, but again, this is where you make trade offs and choices. But if you can avoid heating something up that is plastic, right? Like we've all been trained, don't heat plastic up in the microwave. But so many of our appliances, like coffee makers, air fryers, for example, have plastic or plastic linings, and you really want to minimize heating up that plastic because just like the cookware, if you're spending all this money on organic and safe and healthy sustainable foods, you don't want to contaminate it, right? Like that to me is like heartbreaking. It's oh, but
Mhm.
you're just choose this a little bit better. And so no, I'm not gonna ever say like, throw out your air fryer, throw out this, don't do that. But there are safer choices for some of these products. But that's the other thing that I should mention here is not everything has a safe equivalent. They're just sometimes you might think like we're in technology world, we can always make something safer. Sadly, right now, there are products out there that just do not have a truly non-toxic equivalent. Are there safer ones? Yes. But I can list off tons of products that you're just not going to find a safe one. And if somebody tells
Mhm.
you it's safe, they're lying to you.
So we just make the best choices that we can at any time. Real quick, because it came to mind, the clean 15, dirty dozen list. Do you think that's a good way to go as well?
I do. I share those with my clients all the time.
Okay.
And
And they change, I'm sorry, they change yearly, don't they?
they do. And there are historically ones that stay the same. Like strawberries has been
Strawberries,
30 dozen
tomatoes,
for yes, for a very
celery.
long time. A lot of nightshades will, and sometimes it just depends on the skin of the produce, but actually I think that is perfect. Like I will tell you early on doing this, I used that as my guide, and as I've done more
Same
research,
here.
as I worked for an organic produce company too at one point in my career. Like that's when I learned all about organic and organic impacts, and
Mhm.
again, I can talk about that all day long, but and even we as an organic distribution company that supported organic farmers would talk to chefs about that and talk to consumers about that. I think that is so important. If you can afford all organic, great. If you can't and you're trying to figure out how to maximize your dollar, that is an amazing tool. And I think the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to like organic versus conventional, sometimes organic is actually not that much more expensive, or sometimes
Mhm.
it's like the same price. Like,
Mhm.
especially right now, I've been shocked when I go to the grocery store.
Yet there's not much difference.
Yeah,
They're both ridiculous right now. Yeah.
yeah, they are both ridiculous, and I'm like, "Well, that's actually, like, only 5 cents more." I'm like, "Alright, guess I'm getting"
Yep. Go to your organic. And
Yeah, but absolutely, I would say use that as a great guide.
And for people that don't know what that is, it's called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. You can find it online. Put in Clean 15 Dirty Dozen 2024 and it gives you the list of the foods that the produce that is the most contaminated, where you absolutely want to spend that little bit extra, as we said, maybe not, to go organic, and others where they're the lowest contaminated, very rarely.
Yep, so and it's environmental working group, so if you just go to environmental working group's website too, you'll find it there. They publish it every year, and it relates to the pesticide use in these products, which we
Taking
didn't
all these
talk a lot
notes.
about no, which we didn't really talk a lot about pesticides, but, right, I think most of us know that we want to reduce our use of pesticides, but environmental working group is where you'll find it.
Yeah, I see a lot of people love corn. They love their freaking corn, and corn is its own, unless it's organic. It's got the Roundup, right? The glyphosate. I mean, it is its own pesticide. Isn't
Yeah.
it like one of the worst?
Is very interesting. So corn, like I will say, and like this also gets into like GMO and all of this stuff, which is what also we could do a whole other podcast just on those claims and what they actually mean and what people think they mean, because it's not what most consumers think. But so a lot of the corn that is used for animal feed is GMO. So that's going to be higher in the Roundup and things like that. Most of the corn until recent years that consumers ate was actually not as high because it's different varieties. Most people don't realize like there's only so many GMO varieties of food. Not every food out there actually has a GMO variety, which I think is surprising to a lot of consumers. And those are the ones that are often higher in Roundup and higher in all of these like pesticides that are used. So, for example, on the Clean 15, you'll probably, I don't know if it's on this year, I should know that, but in the past 3 or 4 years, they've actually had like sweet corn with an asterisk saying,
I've seen that.
yeah, some people choose to avoid this because, but there is some on the market that doesn't have it. That is starting to change a little bit more where you're seeing more varieties on the market that you do want to avoid. I personally don't eat corn really for a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
Like
wrecks me.
hard for my body to digest
Yep.
and a couple other. And I think it's hard for a lot of people's
Mhm.
bodies to digest, quite
Yeah,
honestly.
it is.
But I also know that there's people, it's like barbecue or cookout season coming up, and and you're
Corn on the cob.
right. If it's that case, I would say, there's also certain foods I'm like, if you can buy that local, buy that local. Like, that's a better way to go. And I think corn is a great one because it can be grown in so many states and you can like talk to the farmers, you can ask them, what they're using because that's
Mhm.
the other thing when it comes to like organic too that I think people should know is getting a USDA organic certification is very expensive and it's very comprehensive. So there are products, especially produce that's on the market, even more especially true if they're local, that might technically be grown more organically or they aren't using all these pesticides and things like that, but they don't have the organic certification. And so I again like I will tell people if you can buy local and in season or go to farmers markets and or get a CSA, like ask the farmer how they grow.
Ask. Yeah.
Ask them what they use. Like they will probably love to talk to you. I've worked with tons of farmers over the years and they love to share their story and they take a lot of pride in what they do. So that's like sort of a bonus tip off topic, but I think it gets back to like where you buy your food and knowing the source of food.
Mhm. I just last weekend ordered some beef because I don't do beef as often because I have to watch saturated fats, but I ordered from an organic grass-fed up in Wyoming, and I'm waiting to get that. And again, when you know where it is, they've got everything printed on their site, came from a very reputable source where I found it. I prefer buying that kind of stuff. I used to buy from I bought from a rancher up in Montana, down here, and even the flavor, like, it's just different. There's just something, and you have this peace of mind knowing what you're getting when you're doing this, and yeah, I we're gonna have to do one on GMOs versus non-GMOs, maybe do the chicken. I already have other podcasts coming in my head now, or I wanna have you back and talk about this. Um, okay, because there's a lot of women listening to this podcast. Makeup, brands. Can you get
So what's really hard with makeup and the thing to know about makeup is it's gonna have heavy metals. And that
lead?
especially if it's a right? True, like they call it color cosmetics. So, and even more so if they, not even more so, but like natural, to get these colorings, you're often using pigments, and these often have heavy metals. Um, there was an amazing brand. They paused operations till later this year, and it was a brand I was actually very closely affiliated with called Beauty
Beauty counter? I just heard that, yeah.
and they are still in Ulta stores and Ulta online with select products, but they've paused operations until later this year as the founder and CEO is actually buying back the company from a private investment firm. But in the US, they are the only ones that are screening multiple times per batch for color cosmetics and contaminants in their makeup. And what I think is really important to know is this is a super expensive step, which is why most companies don't do it because it's not easy. It makes it more complex from a product development standpoint, like what your standards are. But there's plenty of other, it depends on your budget too. Like there's plenty of other brands out there that I would say are doing better. I mean, Ilia is like one. If you're more on like a drugstore budget, I would say you're switching from a CoverGirl and Maybelline, like Mineral Fusion is actually a great one. where sometimes you might be making trade-offs is like, is your lipstick lasting 12 hours or is it lasting 3 or 4? I have so many tips and tricks on how to make some of these like less expensive, maybe not, quality of department stores and things like that products last a little bit longer. A lot of it comes into like, how are you using it? And I am like, look at me, I'm not wearing tons of makeup. I'm not like a crazy makeup person. I have my few basics that I love, but I think that's really important to know when it comes especially to makeup. The other thing is avoid waterproof mascara. And the reason for that is most of them are going to have PFAS in it. That's what makes it stick. That's what makes it waterproof. So
Ah,
if you start seeing waterproof mascaras, that's a big thing that like or waterproof makeup. Like I get asked about that all the time, like especially going into the summer months.
yeah.
But the reality is that and that's by your eyes. Like,
Hmm.
come on, and again, I think that's a hard pill to swallow because for so long we were taught, like, let's use that. But those are a few brands to pay attention to. Again, Beauty Counter you can still get at Ulta.com, Ulta online. This news just came out last week. They'll be back later this year on their website as well. But they do a lot of good work with advocacy too. So they've helped change regulations in personal care, which is why I also love them because I'm a big advocate and I like that they're a big advocate for actually changing this industry. But I can even include some links. I'll have more updates on my website soon, but I can include some links to leave in the comments as well for some other safer brands because I get asked about makeup. And I'll include some kids brands because if you've got parents, I get asked about kids makeup a lot. Um,
Kids makeup?
yes. So like kids, teens, tweens. So
Yeah.
right, because here's the thing about makeup and personal care products. Many of them are high in hormone disruptors. And what do we know about women? We're starting puberty earlier. We're having more health issues earlier. Often they're related to our
Thyroid.
thyroid. Exactly. And so I actually love getting those questions because I tell you, as a teenager, when I wore makeup, I'm, like, embarrassed when I think about my skincare regimen and makeup and everything I bought as a kid. I'm like, "Oh my gosh," because so much of it too has all of these things in it that are actually not good for your skin. So what do you end up doing? You end up spending more money on products to fix what your
To
cosmetic
fix it. True. True.
and so, like, simple is definitely better, and, you know, Chrissy Coleman, who's a pretty famous makeup artist, always says, like, "Your makeup will never be a 10 if your skincare is like a 2," and I think that is so true, and I think that goes to quality, I think that goes to safety, like, as well, but I will also include some links too, because especially with, like, Halloween or birthday parties, like, I know that this comes up. Nail polish is another one that comes up, and the reality is nail
Yeah.
polish is one of those products that outside of, like, a couple of water-based kids nail polishes, there are only safer nail polishes, there's no such thing as a non-toxic.
Nothing is safe.
There's no such thing as a non-toxic nail polish. So I'll include some of those links too, because I think that is
Awesome.
really important. I think kids, teens, tweens should still be able to put on a little lip gloss if they want to put on a little lip gloss. There's so many products out there that are trendy and hip and found at tweens and teen stores, but there's actually cooler ones that are actually safe.
I love this. I love this. I am so thankful that you came on today. This has just been a fascinating we've just talked for 2 hours and it blew by. If people want to work with you, how can they reach you? Tell me how to have them reach you.
Yeah, the best way is through my website, theingredientinsider.com. I also have a free Facebook community called The Ingredient Insiders with an S on the end. So you're part of the insiders community. And that group is a place where if you have just a quick question here and there and you just want to post it in the group, I really welcome that because, again, I like to be accessible and I'll answer questions every now and then that are like quick one offs, but I share a lot of free education there. But if you want more personalized assistance, reach out through my website. I always have a free consult call with me. And while I have a few key services listed there, the other thing that's important to me is I always work with your budget and your needs. So while I have a few key services, most of my services are actually customized to that customer and what they need.
Love it. Love it. So this was fantastic. And we see how all of this is environment. and lifestyle play in, and hey, it works with your genetics. So this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me, and you're coming back. We're just skimming the surface. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, everybody get out there, make it a fabulous day, and read your damn labels. All right. Thank you for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed this week's episode, I'd love for you to share it with someone who'd find the information useful. Please leave a review anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it'll help the information get out to others. If you're interested in seeing if we're a great fit to work together, the link is in the show notes below, where you can sign up for a free consultation with me. So go make it a great day and let your authentic self shine.